Emmanuel Macron's grand ambitions are at stake in European elections. Abbeville, France. For President Emmanuel Macron of France, it has been Europe or bust from the beginning. Since his election 2 years ago, he has fashioned himself as the leader of Europe. He has tried to in the process, Mr. Macron has become the far-right's favorite whipping boy, the trim-suited stand-in for the so-called faceless bureaucrats in Brussels, his name spat with contempt by populists from Hungary to Italy and even in France. Mr. Macron's vision now faces its most critical test in elections for the European Parliament, starting on Thursday. Polls in France show defeat for Mr. Macron would be a stinging humiliation for a president who has barely managed to turn the tide of a popular revolt against his pro-business policies after months of. But it could also be the final nail in the coffin of the expansive vision of more Europe, more of the time, that has remained beyond Mr. Macron's reach. A breakthrough for far-right, nationalist forces would amount to a popular rejection of Mr. Macron's vision. It could also peril at home. Mr. Macron, a former investment banker with no previous experience in elected office, has in the face of the Yellow Vest protests, lightening, a bit, the tax burden on the working class. But in Europe, the French president has shown little inclination to trim his ambitions for tighter integration in finance, budgets, defense, and immigration strategy even as they. No matter the outcome of the elections, his plans have been hamstrung by the indifference to the European project of citizens in France and beyond, the reticence of Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany, and a newly empowered front of populist leaders on both sides of the Atlantic who mock him. Undaunted, Mr. Macron called for a European agency to protect democracy, a European Council for Interior Security and a European Climate Bank in his open letter to citizens. In terms of support, the silence has been deafening. The derision has been, we're the ones who don't want anything to do with Merkel, Macron, and those who ruined the European Union, the Italian Interior Minister, Matteo Salvini, said last week. We want to save the Europe that doesn't have anything to do with bureaucrats, bankers, financiers, and with those who have been in power, said Mr. Salvini, whose face appears on Ms. Le Pen's campaign brochures. Mr. Macron's European friends have been gentler, but the rejection or at least the standoffishness has been no less unmistakable. There are differences of mentality between us as well as differences in how we understand our roles, Ms. Merkel said in a recent interview with the German daily Süddeutsche Zeitung. Certainly, yet Mr. Macron cannot seem to reconcile himself to the fact that the Germans have a far less sweeping vision of the European idea. In his letter, all of that is now threatened. Mr. Macron, most European elections elicit a collective yawn. Not this one. I am going to put all of my energy into making sure the Rassemblement National does not win, Mr. Macron said. One of Mr. Macron's close advisors, who requested anonymity in line with the rules of the French presidency, acknowledged the stakes in a recent meeting with reporters. We can't let people think this is just an ordinary moment, the advisor said. Europe is at risk. Turnout for European Parliament elections has steeply and steadily declined over the years due to the benefit of the anti-Europe forces who tend to use the elections as a protest vote. Ms. Le Pen, since then, her delegation in the European Parliament has missed votes, rarely proposes initiatives, and has been found to have, resulting in a fine of tens of thousands of euros. This time, much will depend on whether Mr. Macron can rally enough enthusiasm among supporters of Europe to go to the polls. He and his subordinates, on a whole range of subjects, their record is a catastrophe for the country, and for Europe, Mr. Macron said last week of the French nationalists. They're the incumbents. Mr. Macron's team was especially scathing of Steve Bannon, the former advisor to President Trump, who was in Paris this week, with the criticism shading into an attack on both men. A strong Europe is a condition of our sovereignty, and I can see that this bothers Mr. Bannon and Mr. Trump, Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said in a Facebook Live appearance. The far-right Pascal Canfin, a prominent Macron candidate, called the National Rally a useful idiot of this political project, the Trojan horse of Trump and Putin. Ms. Le Pen makes no secret of her hopes for a broad nationalist alliance in the European Parliament, if her party is successful. A really big group is in the process of forming, Ms. Le Pen said, with Europhobe nationalists from rising, far-right parties in Austria, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Germany, and Slovakia. She and her lieutenants have been finding a receptive audience in working-class towns where factories are closed, farmers struggle, and jobs and prospects are scarce. They are for France, said Didier Margries, a septic tank specialist who was in the crowd at a national rally gathering on a recent night in Abbeville, home to 23,000 people, about 100 miles north of Paris. Well over 100 supporters, you retired teachers, factory workers, former military personnel, small business owners in jeans, you packed into a small hall to hear Ms. Le Pen's surrogates denounce immigrants, open borders, and Papa Juncker and Mama Merkel, as they referred to Jean-Claude Juncker, the president of the European Commission. And the German chancellor. To carry her nationalist message, Ms. Le Pen has been deploying a 23-year-old party militant from the troubled Paris suburbs, Jordan Bardella. I refuse to excuse myself, to apologize, for being French, Mr. Bardella told the crowd in Abbeville, to heard applause. The French it was a stark contrast to Mr. Macron's choice of a plodding technocrat as his standard-bearer, Nathalie Loiseau. Ms. Loiseau once headed the very institution Mr. Macron now proposes abolishing as the symbol of the elite technocratic culture so despised by the Yellow Vests, the École Nationale d'Administration, or National School of Administration. Lately, Ms. Loiseau's political challenges were evident at a rally on a recent Saturday in Strasbourg, where a cavernous meeting hall swallowed up the crowd of pro-Macron faithful. In a monotone, she appealed to European values of reason, democracy, civilization. Without mentioning "This is how fascism begins," Ms. Loiseau said in Strasbourg. You take it on the chin. The Strasbourg meeting was punctuated by videos of support from Mr. Macron's European allies, and expressions of support for a more integrated Europe. None of that was to be found in Abbeville, a town devastated by the world wars, and almost entirely rebuilt after it was bombed by the Germans. I've always been against Europe, said Ronald Passard, a retired teacher at the meeting. I certainly don't. Christopher F. Schutz contributed reporting from Berlin, and Elisabetta Povoleto from Rome.
Raindrop, truck top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.